So this is a pretty exciting session that we're happy to finally be able to do this. This is the first time we've delivered it in this format, so it'll be great to kind of get your feedback toward the end and everything. But this is a really important topic for us, one that we don't feel is talked about that much, especially today with so many advances in technology and everything going on. We just feel like this is something that we've learned, we want to share with everyone out there, and we hope that you guys get as much out of this as we've kind of put into it and want to share with you guys. So let's jump right in, and we'll kind of go through a little bit of housekeeping and about me, and then we'll jump into the session. So as Allison said, my name is Curtis Hughes. I'm one of the managing partners and co-founders of C5 Insight. You can see some social media and email, how to contact me. Feel free to follow me or connect with me in that way. But we're a consulting firm that focuses on just this, collaboration and relationship management. So do we do technology? Yes, we do. We work with technology. We help organizations figure out how to use technology in the right ways. But more often than not, we're spending a ton of time with organizations on, all right, I'm putting all this money and this effort and this time into technology, but we're still struggling. We're still going through some pains. What's going on? So we spend a lot of time on helping organizations plan and what does it mean to really collaborate, and are we ready for collaboration and those kind of things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This is not a technical session, but this session is going to take you from, hopefully, the thoughts that, man, technology has really come a long way. Surely it's going to help us collaborate better. It can, but there's some things you need to do first, and that's what we're going to talk about in this session. If you want to get social and do any kind of tweeting or sharing while we're in the session, there's some hashtags, and C5 Insight and my handle is there on Twitter. And so let's jump right into kind of what we're going to talk about. And today, really going to hit on three items. And the goal of this webinar is really to paint a picture of how people and not the technologies that you choose are really the secret sauce to successful collaboration. That's how to boil it down in a nutshell. People make the difference between whether these things succeed and whether they're not. And the best way I can think about it is, you have a car and you put fuel in your car, and without the fuel, it won't go anywhere. And the people are really the fuel for this vehicle of collaboration. No matter what tool, no matter what car you have, no matter all these things, the fuel has to be there. You can spend a lot of time pushing it, and you might get somewhere, but it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of effort not to get very far. So that's what we're going to talk about, and we're hopefully going to paint a picture of how you guys can leverage this and tap into really this human factor to accelerate collaboration and make the tools work a lot more effectively. So let's jump right into this first section on the human factor. Let me ask you guys a question. I know it'll be a rhetorical question, but how many of you guys have already talked to another employee today while you've been at work? Probably most people on the webinar. And how many of you have also asked another employee about something work-related? Maybe you shared knowledge. Maybe it was about a project you're working on. And my guess is probably everyone as well. So since the first two human beings tried to collaborate to go out and kill dinner, we've been collaborating, right? So it's nothing new to us, collaboration in general. And you'd think, that we've had a long time to practice collaboration. We've been around a long time, and you'd think we'd be really, really good at that by now. But the truth is, somewhere along the way, we stopped doing the things that have worked. Now, I think, just the rise in technology and all the new and shiny features and the promise of technology making everything better and fixing so many problems, and it does help a lot. There are great tools out there. But in 2015, we've got this need now of quick fixes, the quick wins, the low-hanging fruit, the immediate gratification, and technology has this promise of answering those things for us. But if we really get down to it and ask you guys a question, who really produces stuff in your organization? Is it animals, robots, maybe computers? My guess is none of these things, right? At the end of the day, people are still our producers, and they always have been. People use tools that we give them to actually generate the innovation, the ideas, and whatever it is that our company does. And so without people, and not just warm bodies in a chair, but people that are engaged and want to be there and actually contribute, collaboration just can't take place. It stops. No matter what technology you throw at it, no matter what happens, if people don't want to collaborate, aren't given the freedom to collaborate, it's not fostered, it won't happen. Technology is not going to make that automatic. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about as we go through the session. So everything else besides the people is new, shiny, and great. It's just a tool. It's just that. It's just a tool, and there are some great tools out there, and we'll talk a little bit about how this plays into it later. So the next few minutes, what I want to do is talk about I guess, the original tool of collaboration, right? You and I, and the people in our organization who make technology what it really is, and collaboration what it really is today. So what I want to focus on is two major components of human collaboration. Really, if we break this down and look at how people collaborate in organizations, it really falls into two camps, the emotional side and the physical side. And really the emotional side is really how something makes us feel. I mean, every day when you come in, you've got a mood, you've got a feeling, someone says something, someone does something, how someone makes us feel, how our past and current experiences play into it, our successes, our fears, all those kind of things. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then on the other side, we have the physical side, right? The physical world around us, the information, the things happening around us, how our organizations are changing, how our people are changing, and the way we physically respond to those. So I'm going to talk about these two areas and kind of show you guys how really emotions and the physical aspects of the world around us are really shaping how we collaborate. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the myths later on. So if we look at the emotional side, it really starts with fear. And I'm going to save you guys, a lot of time from experience and digging and things that we've learned just over many, many years, that one of the root causes of collaboration failures and breakdowns is fear. And fear comes in many forms, and it means different things to different people. But when we peel back these layers of collaboration, what we find is that individual fears are often the beginning of a process that not only affects the individual, but honestly affects and infects the entire organization. And it makes a big deal with collaboration. And one of those is, you talk about fears, and fears can be fears of failure, fears of making mistakes, fears of not getting credit for something, fears of being found out, that you may not know what you thought what your boss thinks, fear of being fired. There's tons of fears, and it goes on and on and on. And when we look at it, a lot of reasons why companies aren't collaborating well come back to this fear. So this is why this is kind of the first step in the process. And as you kind of move through this process in clockwise fashion, fear almost always leads to distrust. When you have these fears, whatever they are, you start withdrawing, you start pulling back, and you start keeping things to yourself and kind of being introverted. And a quick sidebar here, there was a study put out by the American Psychological Association and said that 25% of employees do not trust their employer or their boss. So 1 in 4 people don't trust their employer or their boss in some form or fashion. So do the right thing, that they've got their best interest at heart, whatever it may be. So a lot of these fears lead to this distrust. Well, as you keep going around this, distrust actually leads to this hoarding, right? And this is really the anti-collaboration. When you start to hoard information, you start to keep information to yourself, you're not sharing it, you start to think about, well, what is that other person going to do? Are they going to take credit for that? What are they going to do with this information? When you start doing that, this is kind of the downfall where it starts to kind of come apart for collaboration. And again, like I said, it goes totally against collaboration when you start to hold on to information and you're not sharing it with other people. And then lastly, it kind of comes up to this idea of competition. I'm out for myself, you're on your own, it's every man for himself, and this is just a downward spiral that keeps going and going and going. And so it slows everything down in an organization when you have these things. Innovation can't take place, ideas can't happen, brainstorming, new things can't happen. And honestly, all this ultimately leads to a failure to collaborate with each other. And this is baggage. I mean, we talk about, people having baggage, and they bring that baggage to an organization. And so organizations have this collective baggage, if you will, of all the different things that each of us as individuals bring to an organization. So one of the things to kind of think about is, what kind of baggage does my organization have? And I know that kind of paints a bleak picture, but it's a good question to ask. And what really is going on in my organization? I'm going to give you a tool in a minute to kind of look at how you can see what you're doing with collaboration. So again, if you look at these 4 things, note that technology wasn't mentioned at all, right? So these are just the emotional sides of us as people and how it affects collaboration. I don't care if you have the greatest tool that costs $1 million in place. If these things are in place and people fear and distrust and hoard information, no one's going to use that $1 million piece of software. It doesn't matter how great it is. And if you still don't believe me, Gartner did a study a year or 2 ago and basically said that, all information that we get is from, other people. About 50 to 75% of this information is from other people. So again, if you think about that process we just showed, if any one of those breaks down and we're not sharing that information, then are we not sharing 50 to 75% of the information in our organizations? Are we not getting that across and getting that out there in our organizations? So it's a pretty big deal. And what I would encourage you guys to do is think about this in your own organization and how it's affecting it, and do checkups and do an annual checkup or do a checkup on yourself. And that's what I want to show you and kind of what you see on your screen now. Basically, what I want to talk about is this quick assessment of, are you ready for collaboration? And it really is just that. It's really a 60-second culture self-assessment checkup. So here's how it works. I want you guys to do this, those that are on the webinar right now. Take the first column and really check off the ones that sound like your organization. Maybe it's 1, maybe it's 3, maybe it's all 4. And then just find that number and circle it or whatever on the first bar there. And then on the second bar, do the same thing with those questions underneath. Find out how many sound like your organization. Is it 1, 2, 3? How many is it? Then draw a line basically between those two numbers. And that's going to tell you, again, a rough estimate of what is our likelihood to succeed at collaboration initiatives. How good are we? How does our organization and how is our culture set up to be able to foster this collaboration? So I'll give you a couple examples and kind of from the extremes. So if you've got 4 of these out of the first one and none of the second, then obviously you've got pretty low chances of any kind of success with collaboration. If you've got 2 of each, it's probably about an average chance of collaboration success. And on the other extreme, what you really want to get this kind of nirvana is none of the first and all of the second. If you have that, your chances are really high. And anywhere in between you guys will be, but I'm showing the extremes to kind of show how this plays out. So just draw the lines between the numbers, do a quick test, and see where you ended up. See how you're doing with collaboration. And if you're average or below, why are you? What things are going on? And we're going to talk about some of the things you can do later on in the webinar to kind of address some of these issues and kind of talk through them. So now let's spend a few minutes talking about the other side of the coin, the physical side, and what's going on around us, not from the emotional, but from the people in our organizations and kind of what's happening to those people. So how many of you on the webinar would say, this looks like me? What I'm seeing right here, this looks like me. I'm sitting at my desk, I've got 1,000 inputs, I've got all these things going on, and I'm just being bombarded. And we really are. I mean, we're bombarded with information, and it looks like we're doing a lot of collaborating. We're sending a lot of emails, we're being, sitting in a lot of meetings, but I can tell you the truth, this is not collaborating, this is chaos, right? This is pure chaos. We're inundated with information. We each own 3 or more internet-connected devices. We're getting information on all of those devices. So it's a mess, right? It's a lot of information coming at us. And, some of you might say, well, isn't this talking about technology? And it's interesting because technology can help you get a handle on some of these things. Sure, it can help you figure out how to better manage your email box and those kind of things, but it can also contribute to these. A lot of the ways we're getting inundated with information is from all of our devices and all of our tablets, and we're in front of our screens all the time. So technology can contribute to this, and it can actually help the problem as well. But truly understanding how people are responding to this information overload and how it's actually changing us is where most organizations say, "Oh, what are you talking about? How's it actually affecting our collaboration?" Let me give you an example. So there was a study, I think it was last year, that maybe even this year, that Microsoft came out with actually, and found out that the human attention span is now shorter than that of a goldfish. And I know that's very depressing. It's depressing for me as well. But if you don't believe it, look it up. But our attention span has actually dropped 25% in the last decade, primarily due to the way we interact with information. We're texting everything, very short messages. We're tweeting 140 characters, whatever it may be, and we're just being bombarded. So our attention span today is only 8 seconds. And honestly, I'm surprised that any of you are even still on this webinar, or still even listening to me, because your attention span is probably that short. But it's just the way it's happening to us. So we've got to get a handle on this information, and not just get a handle on it, but how is it affecting the people that are in our organization that we want to collaborate with each other. They're being bombarded with this information all the time. How do we make that so it's a little bit easier for them to manage? And just as information and our reaction to it is evolving, so are our teams. The teams today are really changing, and it really is a new way of working. And these aren't the organizations or the teams of yesteryear, right, or even yesterday. I mean, things are changing so fast. Teams today are very short-lived. They're very project-based. We see teams being very fluid. No longer with just a department. You're doing cross-departmental. You're bringing together people from different departments for a team for a short period of time, and then that team dissolves and goes away. So, a lot of things are happening with teams out there, and how those are happening. We're also not coming into the office as much. The Global Leadership Summit in London found that nearly 50% of workforce will be remote by the year 2020, which is pretty crazy. So we're definitely in a new way of working today. We're in a new age, and we're part of a new generation of collaboration. And so, speaking of generational, I'm sure all of you guys have heard the talk about kind of the millennial movement, right? How millennials are coming up, and how our people are changing, and what's taking place with those. So the last thing I want to talk about is really how our millennials and how our people are changing in and of themselves. So, the rise of the millennials is taking place right now before us, right? There's at least 35, 36% in the workforce today. In the next 5 years, the majority of people in our workforce will be this millennial generation, will be this younger generation. And you may be saying, well, so what? Who cares about that? Well, it's interesting because when they did studies on the millennials, only a third of millennials are leaving one job to go to another for money. They're not leaving for more money, more pay, those kind of things. They're leaving because they're not plugged in. They don't have the relationships. They're not engaged. They're not plugged into the purpose of the organization. So there's a lot of reasons why organizations are losing their people. And if that weren't bad enough, when they do lose them, they're only staying about 3 years. So the millennial only stays with an organization just long enough to come in, learn the ropes, get a little bit of knowledge, and then leave after only 2 or 3 years. And so all this knowledge goes and walks out the door. So there's this shift in people staying 10, 15, 20 years at an organization to we're going to see a shift where the majority of your workforce is only staying 3 years. Is that going to, how's that going to impact collaboration and how you're, knowledge sharing and those kind of things? And then if those two things weren't bad enough, by the time millennials become the majority of the workforce, we're going to have, for the first time ever in history, a fifth generation entering the workforce. And so with people living longer, people staying in organizations longer, you're going to have a new generation coming up and people staying longer in their jobs. So again, 5 generations in the workforce in the next 5 years. So how are these generations going to work together? And if you think technology is going to help a 65-year-old work seamlessly with a 22-year-old, you're mistaken. It really won't. You can't just put technology in and say, hey guys, go work together. You got to understand how these two individuals work. There's a 40-year span between them. How are they going to work together? And so generational changes are some of the biggest changes that biggest conversations that we're having with organizations these days and with our clients. So this is a big shift in how things are happening inside the organization today, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So now that we understand a little bit more about humans, how we're impacting collaboration, let's talk about 3 of these myths that we're seeing prevalent in today's organization, and talk about kind of what you may have heard and try to debunk some of these myths that you may have heard. So some of you may be reading this and saying, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to start with best-of-breed technology. I thought, the Microsoft and the Salesforce and the Microsoft CRM and SharePoint and all those are the best-of-breed technologies. I thought that's where we were supposed to start. Well, let me explain. And this one goes back to something I said earlier, that we were all looking for quick wins, quick fixes, immediate gratification, those kind of things. I mean, hear it all the time with such amazing tools today of, especially the latest and greatest. I mean, we work a lot with SharePoint and those kind of technologies. So, the next version coming out next year, all kinds of things going on, and our clients say, let's just pick a great technology. This thing does everything we want it to do. It's going to help us collaborate so much better. And it's interesting because this myth is not about the technology. The key word in this is really start. Don't start with your best-of-breed technology, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But picking best-of-breed technology, yes, but don't start with it. That's the myth. A lot of people say, hey, I need to go out and pick my technology and and get started right away. And again, like I said, I'm not going to steal my thunder. I'll spend a little more time on this later on. And so we often say, hey, when you take this approach, do you want to spend time, paving potholes, or do you, and having to fix them later and repatch them, or do you want to, address the root problem? And the root problem, I can tell you, is not the technology you're using. So don't take my word for it. As part of this Gartner study that I referenced earlier, 80% of these collaboration efforts will not achieve the benefits, due to an overemphasis on technology. So a lot of these organizations out there are struggling because they're putting so much emphasis on technology. And again, like I said, I'll talk more about this later, because this is one of the biggest things we see, is that organizations are spending a ton of time on the technology. And again, don't take our word for it. This is the Gartner study that said 80% of these things are going to struggle. They're not going to give you the intended benefits. They're not going to meet your expectations because you're spending too much time on the technology of it. So again, take time to make sure you're thinking about it. Don't start with your best-of-breed technology. This one will probably come in a little bit of a shock to you guys as it comes up there, and but I want to explain that technology in and of itself has an ROI of exactly 0, right? There's no ROI in technology, and you're probably saying, wait, what? Well, let me explain that. So ROI on collaboration initiatives such as SharePoint, even relationship management, CRM, those type of technologies, it never comes from the technology itself. We've seen it time and time and time again. We do tons of ROI studies with our organizations. It never comes from implementing the technology. If you spend $1 million, again, on a technology, no one uses that technology, I can tell you you're going to get a 0 ROI. So ROI never comes from the technology. It always comes from the use of that technology. And so if you want to know the quickest way to kind of get fired, spend a lot of time and money on a big initiative and then have no one use it. That's a surefire way to kind of be shown the exit door, right? So it's very important that people use these things and spend more time, and organizations spend more time understanding how to get people to use these tools and work together than they do on the tools themselves. And I'll talk more about this later. Warren Buffett has a nice quote that I'll share with you guys, and basically what it says is, you're paying a lot for this shiny new technology and this great technology. That's awesome, but what are you really getting for it? If you're spending all this money on technology, what are you really getting for that technology and for the money you're spending? So make sure you're focusing on the right things. Make sure you're focusing on the value that's going to bring, and not just focusing on the ROI of the technology itself. And I know this last myth here is something we've all heard since childhood, right? It's what our parents always told us. If at first you don't succeed, try again. And it's interesting because I've got a 3-year-old, I've got another one on the way, and they'll probably hear something very similar. But here's the catch. No one ever told us, much less taught us exactly how to do it, to spend time understanding why we didn't succeed in the first place, and that when we do try again, maybe we need to try a different approach. They just said, hey, if you fall down, keep getting up, keep trying. And again, we kind of figured it out. If you've ever seen a child learn to walk, you kind of seen this, where they stand up, they fall down, they stand up, they take a step, they fall down, they stand up, they take 2 steps, they fall down. So you kind of seen this process play out, where they're figuring it out and they're learning that, hey, if I do this, then I'll be able to walk more, and eventually they take step after step after step. And we see this in many organizations, and they just don't embrace failure, and they think that failure is something to be completely avoided. And whether you like it or not, no one comes into work looking for failures, but whether you like it or not, failures are going to happen, mistakes are going to happen. And so we sure as heck ought to learn from them rather than just kind of brush them aside and do that. So we spend a lot of time with organizations putting process in place for feedback, for lessons learned, those kind of things, to make sure that, people learn from the mistakes. And if you don't keep trying the same thing, and don't keep trying to put a square peg in a round hole, right, if it's not going to work. To put this into practical terms, when you struggle or fail with something in your organization, even if it's another type of project that you're working on, learn from it, understand what went wrong, and don't keep repeating the same mistake. To the example of my son, he's 3 years old. if I see him putting a puzzle piece in the wrong place, I'm not just going to say, hey, just keep trying. You try it long enough, you'll eventually get it. It'll work. I'm going to help him understand that that's not the right piece. You got to understand that that piece doesn't fit there. No matter how much you try, it's still going to give you the same results. And if you think about it, that's kind of the definition of insanity, right? If you keep trying the same thing and thinking you're going to get different results. So again, keep trying, but make sure you understand why it didn't work the first time before you keep trying the same thing over and over and over again. And we see this a lot with technology. When someone picks a technology tool first, which goes to the first myth, they say, oh, that didn't work. Well, let me go pick another tool. Maybe it wasn't the right tool. And they put another tool in place. Well, that didn't work. Let me try another tool. And then they put another tool in place, and it continues this process without understanding that the tool wasn't the problem in the first place, and it's definitely not the solution. So let's talk for a few minutes now about some good news. Let's talk about and close out the discussion today about how we can take all these things we're kind of hearing and tap into the human factor, tap into our people. So what I want to do is give you guys 3 do's and 3 don'ts, basically to tell you, stay away from these things and do these things, and you're going to be a lot further along in helping your organization collaborate better. So we'll spend the next few minutes talking about these things. So the first thing I don't want you to do is to start with the tools, right? Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you went into your garage, grabbed a saw or a screwdriver, whatever tool, and then went around the house looking for ways to use it? It just doesn't work like that, right? And technology is the same way. It's a great tool, but it's only a tool. And without the people to use the tool, the initiative will always fail. And I can tell you, and you guys are probably the same way, I've never woke up on a Saturday morning and went into my kitchen and found a hammer laying there with things checked off my to-do list that the hammer took care of while I was sleeping. It just doesn't work like that, right? The hammer doesn't just go in there and start doing things and start working. So again, you got to make sure you're understanding what problem you're trying to solve, where you're trying to go with this, without starting with the tools. So never start with the tools. That's one clear fire way to always lead to failure. And another thing we see happen a lot is when you lead with the tools, it's an easy way to get into this, what we call the silver bullet syndrome, right? Where you think this is going to solve so many different problems. And it kind of goes back to the whole hammer analogy of when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right? So you can walk around and look, and there's a lot of things you can beat on with a hammer, and you beat on it long enough, and I can probably nail in a screw, but that's not the right tool to use. And we see it, especially with SharePoint, also with CRM and some of these other tools, that SharePoint can do a lot of things, but it's not the right tool for everything. And when you start with the tool, you often get yourself into a situation with what problems are we really trying to solve? We're just solving a bunch of problems that we really didn't have in the first place. So don't start with a focus on the tools. Start with a focus on how can I connect people? How can I add value to what we're actually already doing and bring people together to work together better? So hopefully it's obvious by now that, we can't forget about our people. And we've kind of beat this one to death. But if you don't hear anything else I say today, please hear this. When you're focusing on a collaboration initiative, SharePoint, whatever the project is, make sure you're focusing on value versus ROI and your people and what's going to add value to what they do. Because again, ROI doesn't come from implementation of the technology. ROI comes from your people using the technology. So whatever you do, don't forget about your people. Get your people involved early on in the process. Build teams to help, be champions and ambassadors for what you're trying to build. Because we see it play out time and time again that people always support and use what they've helped create. If they're a part of the creation process, they're always going to use it, they're always going to support it, and they're going to get behind it because that's something that they've had a vested interest in. So getting your people involved, don't forget about your people as you go forward. And then lastly, we often see organizations get to the end of a very long collaboration project sometimes, and then they say, man, we're finally finished with that. We're finally finished with that project. Let's move on to the next project now. And I can tell you this is another surefire way to fast track your collaboration failure. If you remember, our people, our organizations, they're changing fast. Things are changing at light speed, and this isn't slowing down. So in 2 years, 5 years, things are going to be very different. And then what are you going to do, right? So what happens in a few years when you put this collaboration in place and collaboration changes. This is one of those areas and one of those projects that can't be treated like some other projects in an organization, an accounting system, whatever it is, that can just be put in place and 5-10 years later you go and upgrade to the next version. Anytime you get people involved in collaboration at its core is about the people working together, right? So anytime you're doing those kind of projects, things are changing. You've got to be continually evolving. So don't stop evolving your processes. Don't stop going back to the drawing board, figuring out what happens, because as soon as you do, your innovation stops. And as soon as you stop doing that. So continue to get feedback from your users. Continue to do checkups. Continue to understand what is our culture. Are we we've hired 100 people, 1,000 people. Is our culture still the same? Are we doing things differently? Do we have a different mix of people in our organizations? What is it like? You got to keep going back to the drawing board and keep understanding how is collaboration happening. I mean, we have SharePoint leadership team, steering committee, whatever you want to call it. We have meetings once the project is deployed and underway. We try to have meetings with all of our clients every quarter, at least, every 6 months, every year, at worst case. But always at least once a year, if not every quarter, or every 6 months if you can, to make sure you're continually doing this. So now that we've talked about 3 don'ts, let's focus on 3 things that I think you should do as you move forward with your collaboration initiative. So you kind of heard it from me already about tools and technology and not focusing on those. And technology and tools will never change your culture. It'll help things look like they're fixed a little better, but cultural change doesn't come from throwing technology and throwing tools at it. It doesn't work that way. It just never has, and it never will. And so this collaborative culture is really the processes, the rules, the framework for how and why your people should work together. Why should we work together? How do we work together? What is our culture? What is it made of? And so this is the foundation of all collaboration. This kind of collaborative culture. What is the foundation that's built on? And home builders take a lot of time to make sure the foundation's right, because that's where the house is built upon, right? That's what it's built upon. So make sure your foundation of your initiative has a solid structure. It's not built on sand, and it's built on nice solid rock that will last and be sustainable. And so on the screen, we saw the self-assessment earlier, and on the screen you've got 4 ways here that you can implement if you were on that average or below average or very low chance of success. Here are some things you can do to increase your collaborative culture in your organization. So again, get everyone on board. Make sure brainstorming is built into every project. There's 1,000 of these that you can do. These are just 4. Be transparent and open. That's one of the biggest things that gets rid of distrust within an organization. Just be transparent. Always be honest. Don't point fingers. And encourage and reward these collaborative behaviors. When you see them happening, make sure, again, people want to be rewarded. Make sure people understand that, wow, that's good. I get rewarded for actually being more collaborative. So make sure you're spending time on those things. The next thing I want to talk about is this thing that I call the collaboration lifecycle, and really to talk about how this happens. And we talked earlier about the emotional process starting with fear that causes collaboration to break down. Now I want to talk a little bit more about how collaboration actually takes shape and what the process is to actually get us to collaboration. We always talk about collaboration, and it's always the end point. We're collaborating, we're working together, those kind of things. But if you work backwards, where did that originate? And that's what I want to do is I want to talk about 4 steps that actually lead to collaboration. And if any one of these is broken, you're not going to have the collaboration that you want to. So let's talk through these a little bit. The first one is that collaboration always requires connection. We talk about making sure that we're connecting people and bringing people together in what we call friction-free ways. So making it easy for people to work together, give people a reason to work together. This includes building bridges, not literal bridges, but ways for people to easily communicate. Maybe it's a way for departments. Maybe you mandate that 2 or more departments have to work together, every month or something like that. Knocking down silos where people just always stayed in their little silo and worked. Building communities of practice where people can get together and share ideas and just get people talking. So make sure that the first way that we end up collaborating is always bringing people together. You got to bring people together before there's ever any collaboration. It doesn't just happen automatically. And a technology or tool, a lot of people think that, hey, I'll put something like SharePoint in place and people just start using it and they're going to start collaborating and they're going to start talking and sharing ideas. It's never happened, and I don't suspect it will ever happen. Sometimes certain people, get that, but you really got to focus on how are we going to do that? Are we going to have a community area where people are going to come together on SharePoint? You can't just throw the technology at it and hope that it solves your problem. So once you create, these connections and you bring people together, are all connections really created equally, right? So that's one question we always ask, and the truth is they're not. All connections are not created equal. And in the 70s, there was a sociologist named Mark Granovetter, and he came out with a study, and you can go out there and Google that, on strong ties and weak ties. And it's a pretty interesting study, and we spend a lot of time talking about it because it's at the core of collaboration. In a nutshell, it basically talks about strong ties, which are your close friends, your family, people you sit next to, people in your department you talk to every day. And the interesting thing is that when you have these strong ties, they take a lot of effort to maintain, because you're keeping up, you want to know what's going on, how are the kids, all those kind of things, right? You're really close to that person. They take a lot of effort. You're talking to that person a lot, you're emailing, you're calling, whatever it may be. And so since they take a lot of effort, we can't have a lot of these. We have a handful of strong connections. If you think about it, your best friends and your really close people, they probably can count them on one, maybe two hands, right? It's a small group. And what Mark Granovetter found was that we have this small group, and in addition, our strong ties tend to move in the same circles that we do. So they actually have the same information, and there's a lot of overlap between what we already know and what our strong connections, our strong ties, know. On the other side, you've got the weak ties, which are these dashed and dotted green lines that you see on the screen, and the strong ties are the solid lines that you see. So these weak ties are your acquaintances, people you may run into at the coffee pot every morning, or people you know from another department, and you've talked to him, gone out to lunch a couple times, but you don't really know him that well, don't even know all the details of his life, everything like that. But what's interesting is that the people that are our acquaintances and our weak ties, they know a lot of information that we don't know. They know a lot of people, they're talking in different groups, they do a lot of different things. And this is where the largest, what Mark Granovetter found was, this is where the largest source of new information, new ideas, unknown information comes from. So again, think of these weak ties as building bridges between, if you talk about it in our organization, between these departments. So building a bridge between marketing and logistics. Those people may never talk, and they don't spend a lot of time, but if we can find a way to get these guys to talk, that's where a lot of information comes from. And so when you're connected to another department or something through a weak tie, you're connected then to their networks, and they have strong ties and weak ties, and you're able to, once you cross this bridge into another network, you're able to generate new ideas, opportunities, cost-cutting strategies, whatever it may be. The best example of this in the real world is, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. LinkedIn's the best one, and I'm sure most of you guys, if not all, are on LinkedIn. I can tell you without a doubt that everyone I'm connected to is not my best friend. These are weak ties. These are people that I know, kind of know. Some of them I don't know at all, and I'm connected to them through just somebody else that we may have known. That's a perfect example of weak ties. We've hired people at our organization through LinkedIn. I don't go have lunch with these people all the time. I don't even talk to them all the time. But again, we're tapping into knowledge, and I know if I reach out that they will be able to help, and if they reached out, I will be able to help them. So it's interesting that that concept's been around for a while, and again, back in the 70s, this idea, but we haven't really talked about this and how it impacts connections. But if you think about this, and this is almost like the blueprint for good collaboration, then put your technology on top of this, and that'll take you even further. So yes, it's true that some of your connections to other people or groups are better than others and will generate more innovation and value than some of your other connections. So as we continue around the collaboration lifecycle, we see that once we have connections, we move into relationships. And once we're connected with people, then we, human nature takes over. We start to form relationships. We start to understand those people. We have friendships, and they're natural and they're organic. And we brought people together to a common place, and they start to share things. They go out to lunch. They start building those relationships. So we quickly form and strengthen these relationships, which then ultimately ends up having more employee engagement. And we talk about engagement a lot in organizations these days, and it's a very hot topic. But as humans, our natural, DNA, how we're wired, is to serve and work with other people. That makes us happy. It actually makes us happy to work with other people. Maybe you're not happy with all the people you work with, but in general, most people that you're supposed to, be together and you build relationships with, you're happy to see those people. So I've got a quick formula that I want to show on engagement because it's a big topic today, and I've got a pretty basic formula I'll share while we're here on the engagement piece on how you can improve some of your employee engagement, because again, that's one of the core pieces and the core steps in this collaboration life cycle. So again, I'd mentioned kind of working with people. My guess is you don't look forward to coming into work every day just because you'll get to use your fancy new laptop or maybe some cool software or that awesome new printer down the hall, right? That's not why you're coming into work. Hopefully you're coming into the office every day because you want to work with and enjoy working with other people in your organization. You really enjoy it. You get a lot out of it. There's a lot of satisfaction, and you get a sense of purpose and achievement from that. And so what it boils down to is ultimately as professionals, we tend to invest our efforts into two areas. One is leadership and one is purpose. And really it's the things that we're compensated for, we're rewarded for, and that's what we invest in, moving up the ladder, whatever you want to call it. The other one is purpose. What gives us a sense of value, contribution, purpose of what we're doing? Those are the two things that make employee engagement really come alive. If any one of those things is missing, you'll never see the levels of employee engagement that are needed for innovative collaboration. And people will begin, if you have both of these, people will begin to work together in ways you never dreamed of. So remember that, collaboration follows this path of connections, relationships. You can see up there in the top right corner, relationships, and then engagement. So if this formula is broken and you don't have engagement, then the entire life cycle is broken, and we'll never get to the final step, which ultimately leads to innovation. And so this is the last thing I want to talk about in kind of the full cycle. And this is really where we all want to get to, right? This is what we're all after, and you can call it whatever you want, but this is the culmination of all the hard work that we've done to bring people together, to form these relationships, to get engagement, and ultimately it should bear the fruit of innovation, ideas, things. So to put it another way and practically, this is where new products are developed, better customer service, more efficient processes, more customers, all the things that actually add value, add to the top or bottom line of your organization. These happen in the innovation stage. This is where it happens. But in order to get to that stage, you've got to make sure you're doing steps 1, 2, and 3 as best you can, right? And sure, technology can help. It's a tool. It will help facilitate some of the engagement. We've seen SharePoint, some of these other tools really help with engagement, getting people. But it's not just going to be, hey, let me throw a tool at it, and steps 1 through 3 are already taking place, and we're going to have innovation. We're going to have awesome things just pouring out of our company. It just will not work that way. You've got to take some time to understand what is happening between these first 3 steps. So again, the collaboration nirvana that we're looking for and that every organization wants, this step 4 innovation, as you can see, technology, as I just mentioned, it can help, but it's nowhere to be found in any of these 4 steps. So it's just that. It can help. It's a tool, but it's not the core driver for how you're going to collaborate and what the process looks like. The last thing I want to talk about is to have a plan. Pretty simple, right? And in fact, Stephen Covey has a quote that basically says, just stop setting goals, because if you're not going to have a roadmap or a plan to achieve those goals, then the goals are just pure fantasy. And we agree with that. I mean, it really is true that, you can have all the goals in the world. If I have a goal that I want to go on vacation and drive to Canada, that's great, but I've got to have a plan to get there. I'm going to leave here in North Carolina. Where am I going to go? Where am I going to stop? How am I going to get there? Am I going to fly? Am I going to drive? You've got to have a plan. And the plan is the roadmap that's actually going to take you there. And this is honestly where we spend, as C5 Insight, a lot of time with our organizations and our clients these days. Because the ones that want to be successful understand that all of this stuff is awesome and great, and technology is awesome, but it really doesn't mean anything if you don't have an actual plan to get you there. And you've got to have a plan with, okay, this is all cool. I understand. I got to plug in. I got to understand my collaboration. How do I do that? So to oversimplify it, I've put a few questions up here and just something for you to chew on. Again, there's a lot more behind these. I'm kind of oversimplifying it for this webinar, but just start by asking some questions of your organization and the project that you're working on. And if you're being honest, some of you may admit, and not out loud probably, that you've never even asked some of these questions, right? And that's okay, because the thing is, you're not alone. A lot of organizations are not asking these questions before they jump right in and just kind of jump in with the technology and kind of get going. So have a plan, all these things, you've got a plan. We want to do this. We want to have these actionable steps. How are we going to know how we're doing? How are we going to get there? have a plan to get there, and then you'll know when you've actually arrived at that location. Make sure you know how you're doing when you get there. So once we've gotten through that, we've built the plan, we understand collaboration, how people interact, all these things we've talked about so far, then and only then are you ready to select the tools, right? So at this point, now you're ready to say, all right, we understand what we're trying to achieve. We understand who our makeup is. What is our culture? Where are we? Where are we trying to go? How far do we have to go? Now we're ready to go to our garage and pick the right tool. And not before this point. Before this point, we were simply trying to understand all the pieces and make sure we had all the pieces in place and kind of the framework. And now we're ready to select the tool. And so once you have the tools selected, then you can go off and start to implement this, use your roadmap, and kind of build this out. And if you're still scratching your head, I want to share kind of a closing quote with you from, again, the Carol Roswell from Gartner that I love, and it really puts it in perspective, and it really talks about there really is too much focus on content and technology. Spend a lot of time, and the technology is new and shiny, and it's great, and it does great things, but we got to make sure we're putting the right pieces in place. Can't put the cart before the horse, right? We got to make sure we spend time on relationships, on behavioral changes, on all these things that are actually going to make our organizations better and the core foundation versus just trying to throw these quick wins, these quick fixes at it like technology. So again, we're coming to close. We've got about 10 minutes left. If you guys have any questions, please reach out. We're going to have an evaluation toward the end of the session, and I'd love to hear your feedback on the session. You know, how it was. Did it match the description? Was it what you thought it would be? And so again, for those that showed up late, we'll have maybe a week or two before we get it up there. Hopefully no more than a week. We'll get this posted up to our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to go and kind of watch it and get our library of different webinars that we've watched on demand. You'll be able to watch it on demand in hopefully another week or so. But I hope this was some good information. I hope it was good information to kind of talk about. Again, don't start with the technology. Start with the people. Your people are going to help you really paint the picture, and they really are the secret sauce to successful collaboration. For those that are on, we've got a bunch of upcoming events. We're doing a ton of webinars. Events.c5insight.com. You can go there and see every webinar we've got. These are the next 4 coming up. We've actually got one tomorrow for CPR for CRM. We've got side-by-side Salesforce and Dynamics. We've got a SharePoint adoption one coming up August 4th. So we've got a ton of webinars coming up. So definitely head on out to our event site, check out what's going on, sign up. We'd love for you to sign up. They're always free, and we'd love for you to go to that. And with that, I'll close and turn it back over to Allison to kind of close us out. But please feel free to connect with us, reach out to us on LinkedIn, Twitter, connect with us, follow us. You'll be able to see what's going on, and we're blogging all the time.